Back to another episode of Conversing Labs. This is a regular podcast from the team here at Reversing Labs, where we dig into the latest developments in malware, threat analysis, and a lot of software supply chain security risks. So I'm excited to have in the studio with me Major Joe Spracklen, who is a PhD in computer science at the University of Texas in San Antonio, and the lead author of a research paper that was just published in March titled "We Have a Package for You: Comprehensive Analysis of Package Hallucinations in Code Generating Large Language Models," LLMs for short. And so Joe and I are going to talk about the study that he and his colleagues conducted to assess the tendency of large language model AI to hallucinate software packages as dependencies to AI-generated code. And of course, how that might fuel efforts by malicious actors who want to infiltrate software supply chains. Joe, welcome to Conversing Labs.
Hi, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Good to have you. And we're really interested in talking with you about this study and kind of learning a little bit more about, what you all learned. Before we start, Joe, could you just tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you're a major in the U.S. military, but right now you're a full-time PhD student. So some of the things you're working on there as a PhD student.
Yeah, Joe Spracklen. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Texas, San Antonio, studying computer science. And specifically, my research is focused on hallucinations in code-generating large language models, which is something I just kind of stumbled upon. This topic, my advisor and I just kind of stumbled upon, and we kind of attacked it full force once we realized kind of how cool of an idea it was. And we knew that other people would not be far behind us. So it came together quickly, and it wasn't my intended field of study. It just the way it goes, and I've gone with the flow so far. But and as you mentioned, I'm also an active duty major in the United States Army. I've spent the previous 8 years or so at the Army Cyber Command before this in a variety of roles, from execution phase, where I was a team lead of a reaction of a incident response team. That's the word I was looking for. Incident response team. Up to a company commander, where I was in charge of about 150 soldiers and 4 cyber protection teams. And I kind of switched career paths after that point and moved into more of a data science role, where most recently I was a deputy director of assessments, where our job was to kind of, using data, quantify how well we're accomplishing our objectives in cyberspace, both offense and defense, which was really, really cool and a rewarding job. Now I'm a full-time student, and following this, I'll be joining the faculty at West Point, United States Military Academy at West Point, to be in their computer science department.
Very cool. So talk to us a little, when you were in the military and working in Cyber Command, was, large language model AI and AI generated code on your radar at all? Was this something that you knew you wanted to study as a PhD student, or is it just sort of like, that's just where everything is happening right now? And so fish where the fish are, so to speak.
It seems like 90% of research now is obviously especially cybersecurity research, is in this intersection of AI and cybersecurity. It's a very dense field, of course. When I left Army Cyber Command, ChatGPT was just starting to become like pretty proficient at coding. Although, we didn't have access to it inside the building yet. We didn't have, it wasn't allowed on our networks. And so I would, if I was doing any kind of coding at the office, I would like kind of code some stuff up at home. Of course, not sensitive information or anything, but code some stuff up at home and then like try to remember it and then to bring it with me to the building the next day. I think they've integrated it. They have some solutions for our teams inside, sensitive areas now. Approved uses, and you have to, because at the speed that these things allow you to work now, these large language models, if you're not utilizing them, you're just behind the game. You're behind the curve. You have to. But yeah, large language models, in terms of research, this was not my intended field of study. Again, I just knew there's 2 types of PhD students I've found. Ones who have a complete roadmap of exactly what they want to do, all laid out when they get there, and they go off and do it. And ones that have a general idea and figure it out along the way. And I was definitely more in the latter camp.
Right.
And this route has just fallen into my lap, and I love it. I really love the research we're doing, and myself and my collaborators have kind of fallen into.
So as we mentioned, your new paper is called "We Have a Package for You: Comprehensive Analysis of Package Hallucinations by Code Generating LLMs." Couple questions. First of all, how you said this kind of came about by accident. What put this on your radar and that of your advisor? This phenomena of package hallucinations.
Yeah, I knew I had some sort of broad interest in the software supply chain, just from, again, previous experience with Army Cyber Command. It was sort of a direction I was honing in on. And it was in my first semester as a PhD student. So again, I was having regular meetings with my advisor, and we just I talk about articles I'd read, and we would kind of brainstorm from ideas. And actually, my advisor and I have kind of gone back and forth on who first suggested this or who brought this up first. But it just kind of came about organically in one of our meetings. And, we both, I remember, both kind of had a look on our face like, that's a great idea. Like, what if someone were to weaponize these hallucinations, these package hallucinations that the models make? And what we found, we have been talking about this kind of off and on for a period of time. And I'd talked to other people about it, saying, yeah, they've had talking about the mistakes the coding models are making. We said, yeah, it's even suggested packages that don't even exist. And it's kind of, we kind of laugh it off. It's like, oh, that's a kind of a silly mistake. And then we're like, well, wait a second. What if they did this? I'm like, okay, so now we need to quantify the problem. Now we need to kind of do this kind of rigorous, comprehensive experiment to learn more about them. How often do they happen? What causes them? Can you prevent them? Things like that. And that's how we set up the framework for the experiment from there.
Okay, so for our listeners, could you just define what constitutes a package hallucination? And as I see it, this seems pretty similar to other types of AI hallucinations, right? You read about like the lawyers, the attorneys who use AI to generate some filing with the court, and it just makes up a whole bunch of precedents that don't really exist. Is it basically the same behavior, but just in the context of code writing?
Oh yeah, I could talk about this for a while. I'll try to distill it down. Right. So the phenomenon of hallucinations is kind of a widely known thing at this point. These AI models are prone to making mistakes, and we typically call those mistakes hallucinations. Although that word, it's kind of grown from what it started to. It used to originally mean only things that the models made up that are completely fictitious and completely made up out of nowhere. Now we kind of refer to it to meaning kind of any type of error that the model makes, which is kind of the same thing, but it's kind of melded into a more general term. But yeah, the models make mistakes. We've known this for a while. It's part of the basic nature of the models, where they're not deterministic, and which is a desirable property. We don't want them to, given the same prompt, we want them to generate different output every time. So they have this kind of stochastic nature where they're sampling from a distribution, which is desirable and creates this kind of rich creative output. But along with that, it's possible for them to there's two basic sources of hallucinations. I should start with that. One is uncertainty-based hallucination, where the model either legitimately doesn't know the answer, or it's confused about the question, and so it has to infer some things, and it has to give an answer. The second is kind of what we call sampling errors. And so as it's sampling the tokens to select for generation from this distribution, it may select tokens in a low probability tokens or tokens in a certain sequence in which it sort of backed itself into a corner, and there's no plausible way forward for it to go than to create something and make something up. So it can back itself into a corner through the choices it's made through sampling. And that's a very deep topic. I'll stay at the kind of high level there. And for the most part, package hallucinations we feel are the same, with a little bit of an exception. We do think there is some mechanism If you think about normal kind of natural language generation, even if you pick some sort of obscure or creative word, there's still a way to kind of linguistically bring it back and save it. When you're talking about code and specifically packages, it's a very specific string, and there's no room for error. It's, and there's often kind of non-normal tokens or strings that are kind of put together. So you imagine if you're in Python, you think of like NumPy. That's not a real word, right? That's only a word in coding. That's only a word in the Python world. Or you think of something like TensorFlow, and you even talk about versions. And if there was a NumPy version 2 underscore, and there's underscores or special characters. And it's very complicated. It's a very complicated sequence for the model to get exactly right. There's no room for error. And so we think it's even more, these package hallucinations are even more error prone than your typical language generation because it has to be so specific. And there is a certain point, if it's generated a certain string of tokens where there's nowhere for it to go, no possible set of continuations could lead it to a valid response. So that was a really long-winded way of saying, and yeah, largely they do behave like normal hallucinations with kind of an added complexity and difficulty factor.
Because of the specific context of code that needs to be executable code, right? That you need to then be able to build.
Coding, it's very rigid. It has to adhere to these syntax rules. It's very structured, right?
Yeah.
Get back, I think I didn't even answer the top line question, which is what is a package hallucination? Yeah. So a package hallucination is as we mentioned, the models tend to invent fictitious things to satisfy the question they were asked, right? A package hallucination occurs when the model recommends or includes in the code a reference to a package which doesn't actually exist. And this is brought about by our reliance on open source repositories, and especially in languages like Python and JavaScript. We rely on these open source repositories to manage our software dependencies, our package dependencies, and for downloading an easy distribution. So if the model creates a package that doesn't exist, you might think, well, that's no big deal. You type it in and it just says error, package not found, and that's not a big deal. Well, we thought, right, from an adversarial mindset, what if someone proactively registered, they were able to figure out, hey, this model is continually hallucinating the same types of things. They proactively register a package, again, on an open source repository where it's anonymous, anyone can upload without a bunch of rigorous oversight. And now they lace that package with malware of their choosing. Now an unsuspecting user who's following, kind of blindly trusting the large language model, gets this package recommended to them, and if they don't do their due diligence, they might download this package and then they've infected their machines. It's really, that's kind of the simplicity and the brilliance of this specific type of attack. It's very direct, it's very simple, and it literally takes one single command to infect your machine.
And it removes one of the big challenges with package confusion attacks, which is at some point the malicious actors have to convince, historically, traditionally, had to get the developer to actually go and obtain that package, pull it into their application, right? Whether that was typo squatting or just standing up a discrete malicious package, but then you had to just kind of dress it up like something that was legitimate, and then promote it in ways that got developers aware of it. And I mean, that was a big obstacle to getting them. But I mean, if you know that their code is looking for a package that doesn't exist and it's going to pull it in if you just create it, that just removes that whole very difficult part of the attack chain from needing to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, typo squatting's been around for a while. This has been a known attack vector. Yeah. The trick has always been, how do we get people to download these packages? I mean, there was some way. Yeah. So the typo squatting is where you register a package name that is very similar to how you would type a legitimate package name, but this one, is laced with malware. So you're relying on, in that case, you're relying on a user mistake, mistyping something, and that's kind of a low hit rate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now we have these coding models. They're becoming more and more trusted. They're getting better and better at coding, and so you're becoming kind of less and less skeptical of the things that they produce. And as the trust builds, now you have this trusted agent constantly recommending you do this thing, and it kind of let you take down your safety nets a little bit. You kind of don't pay as close of attention as you maybe should. And,
That's right.
And it's really that simple. Yeah.
Are you fact checking everything that ChatGPT is writing for you, or are you kind of like, yeah, that looks pretty good, like,
yeah,
move it, yeah, which is the same thing. It's the same dynamic, right? One question I had reading your paper, which you do talk about a little bit, which is from the malicious act, so from the malicious supply chain actors standpoint, what would be, how would they go about figuring out what hallucinated packages these LLMs are creating, and therefore which to stand up, which to create and put on these open source? Where would they be looking for that information? Because it's
honestly, this is why this is one of the reasons we were a bit skeptical to share our code and to share our GitHub repo where the code is that we use to test, because they could literally take that. I mean, that you have to figure it out.
Just check out our GitHub repo. It's got all the packages in there.
Just to be clear, a lot of people have asked for. We have a huge list of hallucinated package names that we generated. We did not make that public just because it could be kind of directly used in a malicious way. We have shared that with people who we know are verified researchers for research purposes, but we keep that private. But it will take some experimentation, I think, on the adversary's part. And you could use our code to do that, to run kind of a comprehensive set of tests, and you check the package names that are generated versus kind of the published package names. So whether it's more of a manual experience where you're just coding and you happen to notice this package hallucination that kind of occurred organically while you're maybe doing some legitimate project, or you do some sort of rigorous experiment where you kind of at scale iteratively probe the model with various prompts and kind of see what was generated, and kind of compile a list of hallucinated packages that you want to try to exploit. But yeah, it will take some manual analysis or some sort of manual work to kind of discover that. That is the hardest part for the adversary in this scenario.
Okay, let's talk about the study that you did and kind of your approach to tackling this pretty kind of fuzzy problem, which is challenging from a researcher standpoint. So you selected 16 popular large language models, both open source LLMs as well as closed source commercial ones, ChatGPT and so on. And you use them to generate, I think, like 500,000 code samples, and looked in those for package hallucinations, and in particular, two languages that you focus on. One was Python and JavaScript. So just talking about that structure, what large language models you used, these code samples you generated, and kind of the choice of which development languages to focus on. What was the thinking? Yeah,
there's a lot there. Okay, yeah. So
sorry.
No, it's okay. Hopefully, I gotta try not to get too deep in the weeds here, because I could talk for a long time about all these things, but yes. So first off, I think I'll start with, we started this research a while ago. This was back in February of 2024. We started this research, and actually the first version of this was published in June of 2024. It's been updated and revised as we've applied to different conferences to get this published in. And this paper will be appearing in Usenix 2025 here in a couple months, which we're very excited about.
Very cool. Yeah.
At the time, the models we picked were the best performing models that were available. We didn't shy away from anything, and we wanted to kind of give a really honest and true evaluation of how how big of an issue how prevalent these package hallucinations were, given the best models at the time. Some criticism I've got recently have said, well, these models are really old, and even 15 months or 16 months old is kind of an eternity in this in this kind of
old in AI terminology, which is like more than a month old. Yeah, right.
No doubt, using model like the best models today, I think these hallucination rates would be cut down pretty significantly, just given the advances in the last year plus. At the time we wanted to give a fair share between open source models and commercial models. The commercial series we chose, ChatGPT, was kind of dominating the scene at that time. So we sampled 3 different GPT models. We paid several $1,000s to ping their API a bunch. And we chose kind of 13 models. We wanted to choose a nice representation between smaller models. The smallest one we tested had 1 billion parameters, all the way up to 16 billion or 32 billion parameters. Yeah, we had a couple of 32s. Yeah. So we wanted a wide range of model sizes. We did DeepSeek, Code Llama, Wizard Coder, Mixtral. I'm probably missing one in there, but yeah, we kind of a wide variety of vendors and sizes, and we just want to really give an honest and comprehensive look. We chose Python and JavaScript because those represent the 2 largest open source package repository ecosystems. I know NPM has around 5 million packages, and PyPy has 500,000 and somewhere in there. But they're the 2 largest by a fair margin, and the 2 most popular programming languages. I believe they're 1 and 2. Of course, you can measure that a variety of ways, but undoubtedly 2 of the most popular programming languages, however you cut it. So we felt there were 2 easy choices to make for a representative kind of sample. Please go ahead.
Well, the what you found is in this research that you did is actually really interesting, and I'll just call out a couple data points here, which one of the big discoveries, which was, at least in the sample population that you researched back in 2024, there was a pretty notable difference between the performance of closed source commercial large language model AI and open source on when it came to hallucinating packages. So for the closed source commercial large language models, you had around 5.2% hallucination rate. But for the open source models you studied, it was more than 4 times than that, 21.7%. Did that surprise you? And what can we attribute that to?
Actually, I wasn't too surprised. I did suspect the GPT models were going to be way, way better. Of course, the easiest thing to say is, of course, the GPT models being proprietary closed source models, we don't know how large they are in terms of parameter sizes and complexity and transformer layers and all those things. We do know, by any account, they're 10 times larger than the other models that we tested. So just from the parameter counts, just from the parametric knowledge inside the models, you'd expect they're going to be way, way better. They just have much more resources to work with and kind of computational power backing them to get better results. So that wasn't a surprise, but even at 5%, if you think about the scale and how many people are using these, 5% still, a small percent of a large number is still a large number, as they say.
A large number, right?
Still, that number actually was a bit larger than I expected. I thought we were going to find maybe 1 or 2%. And so the disparity between the open source and the closed source, I wasn't surprised in, but I was surprised in the overall findings that 20% and 5% were a bit larger than I expected.
Even though, as you point out in your paper, with the ChatGPT, the number you had, 5%, was much, much lower than some other published research that suggested there was a much higher hallucination rate with ChatGPT. Something like, I think it was like 20-something%. So they performed a lot better for you. Is that just how you guys did your research versus?
I'm not sure. Yeah, there was a blog posting. There was a couple blog posts before I kind of put out this research, and being a blog post, I think he did a great job. Before, not the same type of, rigorous kind of experimentation behind it, and it's also being a blog. It's not meant to be like reproducible in terms of how he did the experiment. So it's actually not kind of clear how he prompted the models, what data set he was using, and what he thought about his hallucination. So there was clearly something different in terms of methodology for him to get such a larger number. And we're not quite sure what the disparity.
Or maybe just a smaller sample size, right? Like, yeah, right.
Could be, yeah. And I don't want to comment too much on somebody else's work and speculate, but I think we're confident. Of course, we gave it our data set was so large, and we gave such a wide variety of prompts and kind of rigorous calculation of data that we're pretty confident with our results.
Just describe briefly how, when you generated the code that you then analyzed for hallucinated packages. I would assume some of the folks listening are probably asking this in their head, like, how did you decide what code to generate? I mean, I know because I've read your paper, and it's actually kind of interesting the approach you took. But explain to them, like, how did you decide, like, well, here's the code that we're going to generate and use as a basis for assessing the package hallucination phenomena?
Yeah, so we actually went with two different data sets, and they're kind of with two distinct purposes. The obvious one is we wanted to have real questions that people might actually, feasibly ask a large language model. And so we hit up Stack Overflow, which is everyone's favorite resource before coding models became so good. So we scraped a bunch of popular coding questions from Stack Overflow, specifically regarding Python and JavaScript, and just asked the model. So that was an easy win. The second thing we wanted to make sure we did was we wanted to make sure we had a really broad range of questions. We really wanted to cover like any topic. Any possible topic you might ask the model to code for you, any question, we wanted to have that covered. So we took a bit of a hybrid approach. We first kind of scraped the I want to say it was 20,000. The top 20,000 packages from, no, I'm sorry, it was 5,000. The top 5,000 most popular packages from PyPI and NPM. And they all have a kind of an official description that describes what the package does in one sentence. We took that sentence, fed it to an LLM, and we said, hey, generate, LLMs generate coding questions that might accomplish this goal using the package description.
Yeah, based on these descriptions, right?
Yeah. And at first, I wasn't sure that was going to work. I was actually amazed at how well it worked. We got this really rich data set of kind of novel coding questions. Hey, generate code that does this, generate code that does this. And they're all very well formatted. It was awesome. So that accomplished our second goal. We wanted to have a really broad and comprehensive view of anything someone might ask a coding model. And that way, just to get back to kind of the original results, I do think maybe our results, because of that approach, were maybe slightly inflated. Because, if you ask a coding model a data science question in Python, for example, it's going to have no problem giving you pandas and NumPy and matplotlib all day. It'll give you those without error, almost 100% of the time. Nothing's 100%, almost 100% of the time. It's really when you start to get into the tails of the distribution, into the more obscure coding questions where it doesn't have as much training data to rely on, that's where you start to get into trouble. And we really wanted to kind of put stress on the tails of the distribution and kind of flesh out some of those issues.
Really interesting. So one of the things that you all noticed when you started digging into what factors seem to influence the likelihood of it hallucinating a package was temperature settings. And temperature, if you're not familiar, temperature is kind of a measure of creativity, that, creative freedom that you're giving to the AI model to, diverge from kind of what's the status quo or what's normal, and take some risks. And you found that the higher temperature you allow the AI model to do, and the commercial models seem to be kind of they have a ceiling for how high you can turn the temperature. The open source models have a higher ceiling. That seemed to correlate with more package hallucinations. Can you talk about that and sort of what might explain that? I mean, it sort of intuitively makes sense. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised to hear that, but is there anything we can learn from that, I guess?
In this setting, I'm not sure how instructive it is, because I think, as we're talking about with the structure of code, you really don't want the model to be too creative. And that's what temperature does. So temperature essentially flattens the distribution. So it makes it more uniform and makes it more likely that the low probability tokens are going to be selected. And with coding, again, with a rigid structure, you need certain words in certain specific places. You don't necessarily want that. So I don't think it's a surprise that the temperature setting really messed up the results. And again, as you got to more extreme temperatures, especially with the open source models, it actually started to generate more hallucinations than correct packages. It was over 50%. And the OpenAI models, the more that you set the temperature setting above 2, smartly, because they don't want their models to go off the rails when they're public facing, right? It's bad for business. But we've
all seen what that looks like, and it's not pretty. Yeah,
you don't want that to get in some meme that goes viral. That's bad for business. So the open source models you can push higher, and we pushed out those all the way to 5. I think you're capped at 2 for the GPT series. But yeah, not surprising, honestly. And I'm thinking about it, kind of going back to we were talking about earlier with package hallucinations specifically. You need a very specific string in a very specific order, and if you don't follow that exact pattern, then there's no way to recover. There's no way for the model to recover. You can't linguistically find a creative path to make it make sense. It's either the right string or it's the wrong string. And so if you're sampling these low probability tokens, it's oftentimes you create a string that has no chance to lead to some sort of valid package name. And that's what that started to happen more and more often as we jack the temperature up. Did I lose? I lost audio somewhere. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's because I had the mute button on. Sorry, let's try that again. So, Joe, we've been talking about package hallucinations. We've been talking mostly about just invented dependencies, package names that don't exist. Are there other types of hallucinations that you saw in the AI-generated code, or is it pretty much just the packages?
I saw them, certainly. We didn't test kind of rigorously for them. But yeah, you see, and again, this goes back to, is any error a hallucination? Most hierarchies that have kind of been put out there in academic settings do consider like a syntax error to be a type of hallucination, or just a logical error where the code is valid but doesn't solve the problem in the right way. Is that a hallucination, or is that just a skill issue, as they might say, for the model? It's kind of a blur. It's kind of a gray area. But yeah, I think all the time I get code even now, even GPT that has errors in it. It doesn't quite do what I want it to do. And especially GPT doesn't have as many syntax errors, especially lately, that I've noticed. But you get like even lesser models do still spit out syntax errors where the code just won't even run or compile. Which you would. I expect that to be a problem that's probably not too far away from being solved, even if it's just through brute force and just continuing to scale up the size and complexity of the models, which again, I'm not sure how long that can continue, but
it's expensive and resource intensive. Yes. Yeah.
I think OpenAI is mentioning, $100 million for a training cycle for their new models. I mean,
it's crazy.
I don't know how much more we can keep increasing just the size of the models, but
so your paper talks about things to do to kind of address the risks posed by package hallucinations. And you make this distinction between, pre-generation and post-generation, which you might think of as proactive versus reactive, I think is really so. Post-generation would mean, well, how do we search for and find, hallucinated packages and remove them? And you're sort of saying that's probably not the best use of your time and effort. Much better to prevent those hallucinations from happening in the first place, pre-generation. Can you talk about some of the things that you researched and found might be effective at preventing the creation of hallucinated packages in the first place?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point to talk about. I think most people, when I present this problem to them, they say, well, that's no big deal, especially with retrieval augmented generation really becoming popular now, where the model has access to some external source of knowledge, whether it's reaching out to the internet or reaching out to an internal database. It can use external knowledge to enrich its response and give it some sort of factual grounding before it responds. Say, oh, well, yeah, you just have the model reach out to the internet to verify that the package exists. And then I say, well, the really kind of insidious thing about that approach, we call it a whitelist approach, where you have some list of approved packages. Now, where do you get that list? You scrape it straight from IPI or NPM, and you just have this list of published package names. Well, what if the adversary has already published their package?
Mm-hmm.
And the malicious package name is already on the whitelist. So your model goes out and checks, oh, yep, that package exists. And that's kind of a key distinction. So we were detecting the hallucination part, assuming that no one had published any of these packages yet. It's possible there was already hallucinated package names that were registered already, and we were already going against that list. So yeah, once someone publishes the package, it appears that it's valid, unless you have some way to detect that the code itself contains malware, whether it's static analysis or dynamic analysis or whatever it is. So that's kind of the first kind of insidious thing that isn't obvious from the bat. It's like, well, just whitelist the package names and problem solved. Not quite.
Right. That's right. Unless you've looked at all of those whitelisted packages and made sure that they're not malicious, right?
And to be clear, I mean, especially larger organizations have realized that this is a huge problem a while ago. And there's entire companies whose whole business model is vetting the packages that are allowed to be imported into these organizations. They actually scan the code. They have some advanced metrics that they use before they allow, and many organizations, I'm sure you know, have internal repositories where they host packages, and they only allow packages into this internal repository that have been vetted by one or more companies or systems that they have to verify these things. So with that, right, you have I lost my train. Yeah, as you alluded to, there's two ways. Yeah, you have the post generation method, which is this somehow filtering the packages that have been generated. That's imperfect. That's ongoing research, imperfect way. The ideal way to do it is to influence the model before generation. So you change the actual behavior of the model through modifying the weights, some sort of fine tuning. Retrieval augmented generation does work for this, which we tried. So we tried methods of pre-generation mitigation. We did fine tuning. We did retrieval augmented generation. We also did this method we called self-detection. This will be a quick tangent, but one of the really interesting things we found during the study was several of the models were really, really good at detecting their own hallucinations. This is probably the most surprising thing that we found throughout the whole research. So if we did a separate experiment after we kind of did the main results on and quantifying the rate of hallucination. We did the secondary test where if we detected a hallucinated package, we turned right around and reprompted the model with the package name that we just detected. Say, hey, is this a valid package? Very simple and direct. And in the case of ChatGPT and DeepSeek, we found over 80% of the time, they were able to recognize their own hallucination. So that is to say, if asked, is this a valid package, they would say, no, that is not a valid package, even though the model had just created that a moment before. So we were really startled for that. So they kind of reinforces the idea of sampling errors, where the model has an idea of right and wrong, but when it's forced to answer, it often can pin itself into a corner, and there's no valid way out besides inventing something. So even if the model knows it's wrong, it's kind of forced to give you an answer. And I think that's one of the best ways we could possibly improve LLMs is finding a way to inform the user of some sort of an uncertainty, like, hey, I'm uncertain about this answer, or I'm a bit confused about the question you asked. Can you maybe, can you restate your question? Or here's my answer, but maybe double check that because it doesn't seem right. I know that's, again, for the big companies, they don't want to express that uncertainty and that doubt into the users. That's, again, bad for business. But I think we need to find maybe some sort of happy medium there where the user can be more informed on what's going on inside the model, because oftentimes they have a great idea of right and wrong kind of intrinsically.
Okay, flipping the question around, when you looked at the hallucinated packages, were there clear like heuristics or things that, characteristics of hallucinated packages that seem pretty consistent and that you might use to filter them out of a list of, legitimate and hallucinated packages, or not so much?
Actually, no. And no clear pattern. The one thing I will say that stood out about the package names is the sheer breadth of packages, unique names that were generated. Again, I think over 205,000 unique examples of package names that were completely fictitious. I thought it was going to be more concentrated and maybe a smaller set that were just generated a lot. But we really found a huge breadth of packages, package names, and some were kind of repeatedly generated, but I wasn't expecting the sheer range of responses that we got. But other than that, nothing really stood out. The one thing that did stand out, and again, I was a bit worried until I got this test done. I thought a huge number of these hallucinations were going to be able to be traced back to packages that existed in the model's training data that were then deleted or removed from the repository. And I was like, man, we got great results so far, but it would be a killer if like 90% of these packages were just, things that were deleted. And we found it was actually a very like minuscule percentage it was like 0.7%.
Right.
Only 0.7% of the packages used to exist and then were subsequently deleted. So they were in the model's training data and then were no longer. So it was a very insignificant factor in the hallucinations.
So, I mean, final question, well, almost final question, but I mean, obviously, AI and large language models playing a huge role in code creation. Anywhere from 30 to 50 to, percent of code is AI generated, depending on who you ask. And the use of AI by developers is even higher, right? It's in the 90 percentile range. Given that AI tools obviously greatly enhance code creation, speed development, but also come with risks, what suggestions or recommendations do you have for developers who are out there as we speak using AI to create code to kind of have a critical eye in a way that will help them to identify hallucinations and other things that might pose a security risk?
Yeah, one thing that's obvious is, these models are wonderful. They're incredible guides. They have kind of, in such a short time, of course, changed they've changed my entire workflow. They've changed how I, do business. I think that's true for a lot of people. So they're here to stay. They've already integrated themselves into our lives in almost an irreplaceable way, I feel like. And I don't see that going away. So our research definitely doesn't say, hey, don't use these models, they're unsafe, right? Just urging caution, right? Continue to be skeptical, continue to stay vigilant. I think I like to compare it to a self-driving car, right? Where they're great navigators, but you need to have one hand on the wheel
Keep your
still.
hands on the wheel, yeah.
You need to be focused. They do a great job, almost all the time, but when they don't, you need to be ready, because there are potential weaknesses. And I think it's really interesting, and I would consider, package hallucinations to be one of the non-obvious, kind of a second or third order effect of AI that's opening kind of new vulnerabilities that we really hadn't considered before. And I think there's many examples of that, and that they're going to continue to show themselves, and just to stay alert and to stay vigilant. But I mean, I think overall, I mean, these AI in general at this point is undoubtedly, a net plus in all of our lives. And I hope it continues to stay that way.
Let's hope so. Joe, last question. What's next? What other questions are out there that you're looking to answer? Where does this research go next?
Yeah, I have two big projects going now. I've kind of zoomed out a little bit, taking the problem of general hallucinations in code generating models. One of my projects is looking at analyzing the internal state of the models, the kind of hidden activations that go on while it's generating, and seeing if we can predict the hallucinations before they actually happen. This is the entire scope. This includes like context errors or logic errors. If we can predict a mistake before it happened, this draws back to what I mentioned just a short time before, this kind of self-detection capability. Oftentimes, the models know when something's not quite right, and we're seeing if we can detect that before it happens, and even go a step further and specifically
build that in.
What's that?
Sort of build that into the model, right? So
that'd be great,
right.
but that'd be a great next step. We would like to incorporate some sort of feedback mechanism, so we can definitely already detect uncertainty versus sampling errors. And I've referenced this a few times. So in the case of uncertainty, it would be pretty low cost for the model to say, hey, I don't understand your question. Can you just restate it or maybe ask it a different way? That would cut down hallucinations quite a bit. And then for sampling errors, if the model detects something, whether it's through entropy methods or some sort of information theory way, there's different ways to detect where the model hasn't got something quite right. And so if you're able to detect that, this one's a bit more expensive, but you can even have the model, regenerate its output and just like, hey, try again. Maybe we'll find a different path this time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the overall goal. I think first off, you have to reliably predict them, and then there are ways to build that into a product. And the second big project I'm working on is this idea of vulnerability direction inside the LLM. So other research has shown these large language models are able to internalize and understand kind of abstract concepts, including things like vulnerability. So we have detected what we feel is a direction in this high dimensional vector space that encodes vulnerability, such that if you nudge the model in one direction on this vector, you generate more vulnerable code. And if you nudge it in the other direction, you generate more secure code.
Mm-hmm.
We're ironing out some wrinkles with that. It's a fairly complicated problem, but it's pretty cool to know that. And this has been shown kind of for other concepts as well. But yeah, you can nudge the models in certain directions in this high dimensional space and influence the way that they generate.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We're in these early days of, even 2 or 3 years ago, right? The quality of code generated by AI models was just not reliable enough. But we've recently kind of crossed that line into like, well, yeah, this is actually, functional, usable code. And so it's like this kind of frenzy green field of like, holy crap. But the types of things you're talking about are not as far along. It's like, well, how do we put checks and quality and security evaluations on this code, this amazing looking code that's being generated before we implement it,
Right, and it is amazing. Yeah, but now I think we've sprinted up this capability. They emerged so fast, and I think it's healthy. We're maybe slowing down a bit and taking a step back and saying, okay, these are great. Now, how can we, build in the security? How can we make them better for the user? How can we, increase the quality of life to get the most out of them without having to worry about some of these second and third order effects, right? And the third project that I'm actually just starting up is we're digging back into package hallucinations, and we're digging back into mitigation. So looking at some more advanced methods of mitigating without decreasing the code quality. That was the big finding. The paper was on the fine tuning was extremely effective to mitigate the package hallucinations, but it came at a substantial decrease to the quality of the code generated. So we're trying to decrease the package hallucinations while keeping the code quality high.
So you're toning down that creativity, right? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be one part of it for sure.
Major Joe Spracklen, PhD student, computer science, University of Texas at San Antonio. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about your research on AI code hallucinations, and really interested to see what is coming up next. We'd love to have you back on the ConversingLabs podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I had a great time. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. Great. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to thank also our audience and our listeners, folks who joined us via social media, and of course, our producer, Carolyn Van Arsdale, who does so much of the yeoman's work to make these episodes happen. Carolyn, thank you so much. And tune in a couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about supply chain risk with regard to aviation technology. So it's another conversation we got coming up shortly. So stick around. We'll be back with more Conversing Labs episodes in the future. Major Spracklen, thanks again.
Thank you, guys. It was a great time. Thank you.